everyone, welcome to another Overrated Film Saturday. Apologize this video is being uploaded late, but I unfortunately was fairly busy this weekend, and I wanted to do everything Monday, but I just got too tired. So I'm going to be doing all of the videos that need to be uploaded today so that you may enjoy them all for your viewing pleasure. So without further ado, let me discuss what I wanted to discuss for this Overrated Film Saturday. And may I emphasize again, I don't think this is a horrible movie. I don't think this is a horrible story. I don't think that this is a disaster movie. You know, it's not. You know, it's definitely not Battlefield Earth. But at the same time, there is a lot of praise for this film, and I feel, to be honest, that this is a good movie, but I didn't think it was as spectacular as other people, I think, made it out to be. And that film is Up. Now, I did mention my favorite Pixar films and reasons why I found them to be the most enjoyable. Now, I did enjoy Up overall as a film, but it really wasn't my favorite. And I was kind of thinking to myself, what did kind of really bother me? I mean, what was setting me apart from really putting it on a favorites list, and why did I feel like it was sort of overpraised for what it was? And there are a couple of things that I think could have, I think, made this movie, at least for me, a little bit more engaging and a little bit more interesting. Because it does have a lot of interesting ideas in it, but I don't think it ultimately really follows through so well on those ideas, because there ends up being sort of this cluster that ends up happening, and I think a lot of that has to do with the plot and then some of the characters that they introduce. So without further ado, let me kind of discuss why I think it got a significant amount of hype and why the critics like it, and what I think the problems are. I think this movie got a lot of praise because it was really the first really animated film, and I will give credit where credit's due. I mean, it is the first animated film that addresses, you know, the older generation and older people. Usually animated films are focused largely in part on children and family, but not on really grandparents or usually when they're grandparents, you know, they're like, you know, the really spunky grandma, you know. They're just kind of in the background and very, you know, they're very entertaining and vibrant, but they're not really the main focus of the story. On an Up, it's different because we have an older man as our main protagonist, which again is good, but that doesn't make it a good movie just because you bring up a new concept. It's the way you execute that concept that's what ultimately makes it work, I think. And this is where I think Up again sort of falls a little short for me. I will say the scene with Carl and Ellie, that's a great scene. That's a great scene within itself. That could really just be its own movie. Just this own, or this own, not this own movie, but just this little short could have won, you know, best animated short. I mean, all you needed to do was just have this be an animated short, and, you know, Pixar would have won that. I mean, they really didn't need to make a movie out of that. If they just made that one short, you know, that's the movie pretty much for me. That's that whole bit where you see the couple, Carl and Ellie, grow old together. But the movie is about that, but it gets sort of clustered in as far as its message, because what ultimately ends up happening in the plot is, you know, you only see them together for, you know, that whole segment of time, and up until she passes away, which is, again, just an animated short. It's not a movie. And then after that, Carl ultimately decides to leave to the place where he and Ellie initially wanted to go all their life. And that's a great setup. That's a great idea. And then there's this kid that ends up tagging along, which I think is okay. And I think really works, for bringing in kids, and generating kids' interest. But where the movie loses me is when they introduce these dogs that talk and that are, they have airplanes, they fly airplanes, okay, and they talk. And I didn't find it to be all that funny. I just thought it was just, okay, you're bringing in these talking dogs. What purpose do they serve? Are they just there to make us laugh? And even then, they're not that funny. Um, and then they bring in a villain. And to me, this is really where, Pixar is not known for their villains. I mean, if you look at their villain lineup, they don't really have a whole lot of interesting villains. They do not, I mean, if you look at compared to Disney, their villains are not strong at all. Um, and sometimes they bring in villains when they're really not necessary, or they'll sometimes bring in things that you know that don't really need to be inserted as part of the story. And what ends up happening with Up is the story follows around to, okay, you introduce these talking dogs, and then there's this villain. And then we have to have a whole, debacle between the villain and the protagonist, the the Carl, the older man. And eventually the kid sort of contributes. And again, the kid is kind of used as comedy. He's not really taken all too seriously. But at the same time, I'm just thinking to myself, okay, this story is all over the place. You introduce these talking dogs who fly planes, and then now you're bringing in this villain who I really don't feel amounts to anything. I mean, why do you need a villain in this kind of a story? I mean, it doesn't make sense. Just have the story be about Carl and the kid's journey as they go to find that one place that Carl and Ellie always wanted to go. Why do you need to insert this villain and have these talking dogs that serve no purpose? They serve nothing. They just serve as a distraction from really the story. I mean, why do you even need to have a villain? I mean, and it's emphasized too that they're in a very tropical environment, somewhere I think in South America, that already has conflicts. You already got predators who are out to get you, and maybe insects, or maybe you get lost and you have no idea where the heck you are. I mean, those things are what would have developed Carl and the kid's relationship. And I think that works really well too if you had a kid, because the kid and the older person can sort of bond and sort of bridge the sort of generation gap, so to speak. And you could have made tons of references to technology, and how the kids are also tech savvy, and they don't understand, the older generation doesn't understand all that stuff, and there's tons of little things you could have gone more into, but they don't. It's barely in there, if anything. And what do we have instead? A kid who's mostly designed to be comedy. He's designed to be the goofball kid, that tags along with Carl. He really doesn't, he's not really taken seriously as a character. I mean, you could have added a little bit more as far as, his backstory, or, his parents, or something involving his life. But that's really not the focus. And again, a lot of it has to do with that detouring to, again, those dogs, and then that villain who's really doesn't serve, I think, a whole lot of a purpose, and just completely deters the ability for the story to, I think, be more interesting and more engaging of a story. And yeah, I think that's really what threw me off with this story, was the fact they decided to have a villain. They decided to put in these bizarre scenarios, and, not really focus at the heart of the story. And I think it does go back to it, but it just feels so, and, the interesting thing is you could have flashed back into maybe points where Ellie and Carl were having maybe a difficult time, and, or, when Carl's getting discouraged of even finding the place that they always wanted to visit. I mean, you could have gone into so much more avenue with this kind of a story, and you could have gone into more bonding with the kid. But no, you have to insert this pointless villain, and you have to put in these dogs that I don't think are funny. I mean, the Nostalgia Critic was going on about how funny it was just because their voices sounded goofy. Because there's one point where all the dogs, that the reason dogs can talk is they have these collar things that kind of translate, I guess, what they're saying and thinking. But at the same time, to me, it's stupid. It's stupid. Why would you do that? What's the point of having that? There's no purpose in having these dogs talk. There's nothing whatsoever. Yeah, we just decided to pull this out of our hiney because we thought it was creative. And I'm just like thinking to myself, how is this creative? How is this interesting? How is this furthering the story in any way, shape, or form? It's not. So, yeah, I think, again, and I think that's, again, what people, I think, don't realize is they think, oh, it's such a touching story with the, with the older man, not having a wife anymore, and it's so sad, and, the fact that he gets to go to the place where they always wanted to go, and that's the heart of the story. But when it gets convoluted with this this very insanely stupid premise involving a villain, I mean, how are we supposed to take this story seriously? Like, we can't. It just gets lost, just because Pixar felt it needed to put in these things that I don't think really needed to be there. And you didn't need to have dogs that talk for it to be funny. Like, you could have made it funny with the kid and Carl, like their whole interactions, and how the fact that they don't really understand each other because they're from different generations. And, I mean, that should have been the focus, but that was not the focus throughout this movie. And oh my, I just feel like, that's really something that I think people miss, because they'll say, oh, what stands out about, oh, when he loses his wife, and, he has to go out, and he has to, find something, and, and it's something that they always wanted to do, that's what people remember. But it's when you really look at the whole movie, when you look at the whole story, it really, I feel, loses its message when it includes this ridiculous plot involving this villain, and then having these dogs that talk for no reason, and, just putting in a bunch of goofy characters for the sake of putting in goofy characters, not really doing anything so much with them. You lose the interest that you had in the initial story. And I think that's where Up kind of lost me a bit, and where I felt like this isn't as, I think, good as people make it out to be. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying it has as much issues as maybe some other animated films do. I'm not saying that this movie didn't deserve credit where credit was due, for at least trying to do some things different. But as far as execution is concerned, I still don't think it holds up as one of Pixar's most enjoyable for me. Like, I don't really find it as funny. I don't really find it as engaging. I find a lot of it to be kind of just dull. And, I think, had they made the focus primarily just on Carl and this kid trying to go to where they needed to go, that Carl wanted to see because he didn't get a chance to see it with his wife, that should have just been the movie. You know, it didn't need to have talking dogs, it didn't need to have a pointless villain and the protagonist being dragged in with this stupid villain. You know, there was no point, no purpose. Already, and again, they were in a very discrete locale. You know, you could have had predators, you could have had insects, you could have had getting lost, you could have had tons of scenarios in there. You didn't need to insert a villain. You know, there was no point, no purpose. And I feel like that's, you know, that's just something that those are the things that really just deter me from enjoying this film, because it settled for being generic by putting in the things that we oftentimes see in children's films without giving them any weight or purpose. So I think that is something that that I think a lot of people miss. Like, people think, oh yeah, it's about him wanting to go on a journey and all that. It's like, yeah, but when you introduce a villain, when you introduce these talking dogs, and it completely deters the real underlying message, and it really deters the development between really the two main characters that should really be our focus in this movie. And I don't think a lot of the characters are all that memorable. I mean, Carl's memorable, but you know, the kid is, you know, I've seen this kind of kid before. You know, he's no different. You know, and he's not really developed, I think, all that well. So again, I appreciate its focus, and I like what it's trying to do more than what I actually like the final product, because I think ultimately the final product doesn't succeed as well with its message as it could have. And I think, had they deterred of ever giving the story a villain, had they deterred from ever trying to put in comedy that is not necessary, and just pull things out of thin air just for the sake of pulling them out of thin air and saying that it's creative, to me is just it's just not funny, and it's not engaging. So I think those are the things that really deter me from enjoying Up as much as I would expect to. It's a good movie. I think it has a lot of good qualities to it, but it is, I think, as far as Pixar standards are concerned, I think there is a lot more. There's a lot more interesting things that I think other films that they've done have said, and have said, than what's in this film, because I think a lot of what's good it's trying to say is deterred by things that are just distractions, and don't, I think, fulfill the true film's purpose. Um, so that's why I think that um, there's this inability for me to really enjoy it as much as a lot of other people do. But I understand if there are other people who feel differently about this. But in my honest opinion, I think it could have done better for itself. I think if it did focus more on the kid and Carl, we would have had a better film, instead of trying to put in all of these other characters and put in all of these other circumstances that just, I don't think, amount to much or to really what the story was trying to say. So yeah, I think that's really, though, ultimately all I can say about this film. But again, I totally understand if there's others who feel differently, but I feel like that this film was just it was just too all over the place, and as a result, it deterred my enjoyment of it. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care.